with another episode of Sip of Solidarity.
Danielle's already dropping the sign and making lots of noise.
Yeah, so we are your co-hosts, Amy Houston and
Danielle Valentine.
Yeah. And tonight we are, hopefully you saw it already in the post of this, but we are talking about a very sensitive topic. And so if you are someone that has experienced great trauma in your life and you might be triggered by this episode, we do ask that you
be aware
or kindly not listen if it's going to be an upsetting topic for you. But we want to bring awareness to serious things like childhood trauma and specifically with human trafficking. And so tonight we have with us Nicole Terrett. So she can introduce herself and tell you a little bit about who she works with, what she does, why is she here to help us on this conversation.
Yes, thank you. I'm so glad that you guys asked me to be here. I am Nicole Terrett. I am the Director of Development at Rahab Ministries. And if you don't know who we are, Rahab is a nonprofit ministry here, based here in Akron, Ohio. And we serve women and children who are victims of sex trafficking. So actually with that, so I'm going to back up real quick and add to your warning is it's not a kid-friendly conversation either.
Yeah. Make sure we try to bring some real conversations, but this one it will be a little touch and feel for kids, so not have them by the screens.
Yeah. I was at dinner tonight with my husband. He's like, "What are you discussing again tonight?" And I just looked at the kids and I'm like, stuff.
Yeah, and so
you could have said Rahab and he would have been
I
got it.
Yeah. So just a little house maintenance real quick before we get the conversation started. So please share this. Our goal of tonight is to bring awareness, kind of talk about some misconceptions, talk about some facts, talk about some information. So please share. We want to reach as many parents, individuals, women in general. Please comment. I will not be responding to your comments as I am in Facebook jail again, but Amy will respond to your comments. So, but share and please let us know if you have questions or input. Nicole has answered a lot of mine already, so she is happy. If there's something that you'd like to know or know a little bit more of, please let us know.
And as always, like if there's something that we don't know the answer to, we will always follow up with you and get in touch.
Yes, perfect.
So let's start with the very high level, the definition of human trafficking.
Okay, so I'm going to quote this directly from
Don't get it wrong.
The Ohio Revised Code. We always start with this at Rahab because we want to set the ground for what it actually is.
Yeah.
And before I read this, the reason for that is because people hear trafficking, they automatically think movement and like transportation, which that is a part of it sometimes, but it doesn't have to be. So let me read this definition to you. Human trafficking is a form of modern-day slavery where people profit from the control and exploitation of others. There's two parts to trafficking humans. Sex trafficking, which is what Rahab focuses on, is any commercial sex act that is compelled by force, fraud, or coercion. Under federal law, any minor under the age of 18 induced into commercial sex is a victim of sex trafficking. So for an adult, there has to be the presence of force, fraud, or coercion.
But for
children, any commercial sex act is considered trafficking. The other piece of human trafficking, which Rahab doesn't focus on, which is also an important issue in today's society, is labor trafficking. So I won't get into that. But I wanted to make sure. That's a whole other topic that I will not get into specifically because I am not qualified to talk about it other than
Nor
the
are
definition
we
in front of me. But yeah, sex trafficking involves force, fraud, or coercion. And I think it's important to say that a lot of times people think that it's always an exchange of money, and we were talking about that's not necessarily true.
Yeah. And we had discussed, for minors, you think, there's not usually a money exchange at 15, 16, it can be anything as food, household, somewhere to live, clothing, anything like that is considered still trafficking, correct?
Or even for adults, that's true.
Okay.
So anything of value, so whether it's housing or drugs, frequently traffickers will use drugs to control their victims. So yeah, it's not just money. It definitely includes money, but food, clothing, drugs, even the promise of relationship sometimes is used to trap people. So
Okay.
So let's talk for a little bit about the misconceptions. One of the first misconceptions that we wanted to talk about is this idea that it's always someone being stolen, or this fear for parents of their kid being snatched from Walmart or snatched at the mall or off the street.
And let me chime in a little bit too, because I want to really tie this to last week. There was a lot of conversation about fearing social media and somebody's going to find my kid and take him from me. Or, we had brought up the many posts on social media. We were in Target and somebody was looking at me a little funny, so I grabbed my kid, and everybody beware. And let's not, deny this. Everyone shares those posts. Everyone comments on those posts. And, you get their hold your child's hand in the mall because kids are being stolen. And that seems to be what people are talking about. And that seems to be where the fear is generated. What do you have to say on that?
Yeah, so that does happen. I will not say it doesn't happen. There are different forms of trafficking, or different categories, we would say, guerrilla, relational, things like that. And I could possibly get into that if you want. I didn't bring it up earlier. But what we see most often is not the getting snatched out of the mall or getting snatched off the street. What we see at Rahab most often is girls who don't even realize that they've been trafficked because, that was my boyfriend. That's my boyfriend that, I'm involved with, and he just has me to do these things for him. So what we see a lot is girls and women don't even self-identify as victims of sex trafficking. And we're even careful when we're speaking with the women and girls that we work with at Rahab, because that can immediately make them shut down and, lose trust or lose some level of relationship.
Meaning that if you suggest that they're being trafficked,
they'll deny it. They'll deny it. They'll pull back. They'll kind of freak out and be like, "Oh, that's not me. That's not me, and that's not my boyfriend."
That's your boy. So more if they're seeking a connection, like if they, they may think this is their boyfriend and they love them and they care for them and they're having them do this stuff for whatever reason, but they don't want to identify as being trafficked at all.
Yeah, they don't even recognize that's what's happening.
Yeah.
So what's the average age of women or girls being trafficked?
Yeah, and that's where it gets really sad, because the average age, and this is not a Rahab stat, this is a stat from the federal government, the average age that a girl enters prostitution, and I'll get into terminology in a minute, is 12 to 14.
And think about that. So that instantly brings tears to my eyes.
Because you have an 11 your daughter's about to turn 12 in a week.
My daughter will be, look, I literally started crying. My daughter will be 12 on Tuesday. And you think, did I prepare her? Do I love her enough? Am I building that relationship with her enough? Is she whole, or will she seek somebody else to kind of cause that? And to her, she would just be seeking somebody else to fill a void or a love, but it could turn to something like this.
Yeah, and that is what happens. The unfortunate truth with having such easy access to the internet is that vulnerable people are easily preyed on by the internet. And not that they couldn't be preyed on the street. Like I said, it does happen, but traffickers are master manipulators. They're masters at knowing the holes that need filled. They can sometimes just look at a girl and know what they need to say to get that girl to connect with them.
So how do you see the internet changing sex trafficking? Is it changing?
Over time. We had discussed a little bit, on our show last week about how when I was a child, we were AIM and we were in chat rooms and we were all that, and we didn't really think that much of it. But now, you can't do that, because if you do that, somebody's going to come to your house and steal you. Was it the same in both generations, just now we're more aware? Do you think that it has grown to be different?
Yeah, so I am not the expert on that question, but I will tell you what I know and what I've heard and what I've come to understand. Because I've not been with Rahab as long as some people, I haven't seen the pre-internet stuff, but what I've heard is that there is less visible street level trafficking. Still happens a lot. It happens in a lot of poor neighborhoods, but it is also online, particularly with young girls. So there's a lot of conversation about online directories where you can post ads, and you'll see a lot of ads, unfortunately, for girls, and they try to get around the law by saying they're 18. But
so we are already talking like a lot about girls. Like, is there any kind of fear, or I don't putting you on the spot with the stats because I didn't ask you about the stat earlier, but like with boys, like is there fear with young boys? Like, does that happen?
It does. So it does happen. It's not as frequent. We don't see it as frequently, but we do see boys. We also see LGBTQ youth are vulnerable as well, but most frequently it's girls. So we have one of the pieces of Rahab, and I won't get into it because I know there's more of that coming later. One of our pieces of Rahab is minor mentoring, and we work with the Summit County court system and with youth that have been identified as victims or even at risk. So there are factors that we'll look at that'll say, is this juvenile at risk to be trafficked? And I'm trying to remember the numbers. I don't exactly remember, but seeing the number, I'd guess maybe 85-90% are girls, a couple boys, and then even fewer LGBTQ, like I said. But that doesn't mean that they're not out there. That's just what we're seeing in our local area.
Yeah. Okay. Are you going over the test? I can't see our list. Go ahead. I'm going to let you lead the questions because I can't read them.
I was going to say next, like, how can we see it coming? Like, what are signs? What puts somebody at a higher risk for being trafficked?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was saying. We talked about there's like some tests out there that can't all be correct, but like 10 questions or something like that. Can you tell a little bit of that?
Yeah, so let me start first by saying when we talk about this within Rahab, and even when we're trying to educate, because a lot of what we do at Rahab, besides the direct care service to victims, is education and advocacy. And the way we talk about it even is that these people are not there by choice. That's part of the whole, like, being trafficked. So we don't necessarily use the word prostitute. We say they have been prostituted, or they have been trafficked, or they are a victim or a survivor even of trafficking. So to go back to your question, and I say that because I want to have this mindset of we approach everyone with love and care and respect, and not in judgment. At Rahab, we don't judge who they are, or where they've been, or where they're currently at even. And some of that is because that's just the right thing to do. That's the godly thing to do. Rahab is a Christian ministry. We believe that Jesus is the answer, ultimately. But we also know that there's a certain way to approach people who have been traumatized. So all of that said, to answer your question, we like to say a lot, relationship is the intervention. So especially because people who are vulnerable are looking to fill a void, relationship matters. And if they don't have healthy relationship, they are vulnerable to fake and false relationship or promises of relationship. I learned this is actually something I learned recently in staff training at Rahab, is the top 2 indicators for someone to be vulnerable. And I'll mention those, and then I'll talk about the test. The top 2 indicators that we see for people who are vulnerable to becoming victims of sex trafficking are sexual abuse and emotional neglect. So without obviously discussing that in detail, you can imagine why sexual abuse is such a big a big deal. I mean, and
they might not understand the difference between right and wrong, or
Exactly.
they already are so broken that someone showing them love is a win.
Well,
or what they perceive as love.
As I've been taught or heard over, and could correct me if I'm wrong, is when children are sexually abused at a young age, they then seek that as attention and love in a relationship.
Yeah, so when someone is sexually abused at a young age, they're taught that my body is sexual, and for me to have any value or worth, for someone to care about me, I need to give this to get that in return.
Yeah.
So that it's obviously very damaging and very traumatic, even if they don't understand that's what happened. But even beyond that, that emotional neglect too creates a hole. So there's the physical trauma and the mental trauma that happens, but emotionally, we are human beings. We need connection. We are hardwired to connect with other human beings.
Yeah, I think like as a parent, that's so scary, like incredibly scary. I don't often worry about my kids being stolen, and I don't have girls, so I worry differently with my boys, but I don't often worry about a surprise tragic thing happening. I worry so much about breaking them and like ruining them. And I joke about, they'll be 25 and they'll be in a small group Bible study somewhere, and they're going to tell someone how their mom like ruined them growing up and how they're coping with that. And that's like on like the silly, less serious side, and I hope.
Yeah.
But I think it's just really scary to think, and I think, it's going into this topic. I think we need to be aware of the relationships we're building with our children, and we need to be conscious of being very intentional with that. We also don't need to live in too much fear of that. Like, we could drive ourselves nuts. Am I loving them enough? Am I open enough? Are they feeling neglected?
So just to this is so timely even, and I didn't even think about this earlier when we were talking, but I actually had the privilege and the honor of doing a Bible study at our drop-in center at Rahab with the women that come in last week, and I had heard Pastor Jeff talk about just the name of Jesus, and they put the song Trumble, which the chorus is, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. So it kind of got impressed on my heart to speak about God's love and who Jesus is and his power and how he casts out fear to the women. It was a great conversation. But you talking about that, even as parents, we hold so tightly to our children and are afraid of breaking them. I've had the same exact fear with my boys. I'm like, am I screwing them up?
And in some way, there's going to be something we failed at.
The truth in that is, and whether or not you are a believer and whether or not you believe in the Bible, the truth is love casts out fear. We hear that in the Word. We read that in the Word. So, yes, there are things that we can't control in life, but being fearful and living our life in fear isn't healthy. It's not the right way to live if you're a believer. It's not the right way to live if you're not someone who would say you follow Jesus or have a faith background. But
I know Jesus was coming.
there's a lot of conversation about not living in fear, not living in anxiety because you can't control the future. What we can do is be informed. You can make the wisest decisions. You can apologize when you make mistakes to your kids. That's so huge. Even we see it with the girls that we work with at Rahab, and it's important for them to see us make mistakes. Not that we make mistakes on purpose, but if we do, we make it right, and they see us make it right.
There's nothing more humbling than apologizing to
your
child.
And it's especially important for someone who has been hurt and traumatized, because that might be the first time in their life that they have had somebody live up and take responsibility for something they did wrong. And for our kids, it shows them that you don't have to be perfect, but this is how healthy relationships work. So if they see you model healthy behaviors and healthy relationships, that will go so far in this whole conversation about like, how do I keep my child out of this? Like when you have a healthy relationship with your child and you model that not only to them but to others, that means so much more than any kind of rules we could put in place.
Yeah. The best advice I was given when pregnant with my first child was actually by my mother-in-law. And she literally, like, I was just nervous, like, I'm having a human, and I'm going to have to take care of it, and I'm probably going to have more humans. It's crazy. And her best advice that I, like, literally go back to all the time is, like, the best thing you can do is just love them. Like, they're actually quite hard to break. And, like, there's only so much control you have. She's like, look, I raised 3 kids who are all very different. And if you know my husband and his siblings, they're all very different. And, like, but they're all uniquely them, and they're all loved by their parents, and they have no doubt in that, and it makes the family so cohesive and tight. And it's like, you can only do so much, but, like, for the most part, just love your kids.
And I think so you have 2 boys. You have a boy, right?
Two boys.
Two boys. Okay. So I have Olivia and I have Carter, and I can tell you I love my children both very, very much and equally. But Carter, being my boy, I often am like, just can't break you. I can see him getting married. Like I can see a few, like all this. My girl, I'm more with Olivia. I get to the point of I know what it's like to be a woman and to feel certain things. My parents went through a divorce. Like my dad was an alcoholic. Like I know what those feel like. So then when I raise her, I'm like terrified. Like it's totally different because her pain I'm aware of and her pain I understand. And so like, you know, I put them both, you know, love them dearly. I'm excited for their future, but I'm more scared of Olivia because I know as a mom what those things feel like. I don't think I can break her. I'm going, I can't make everything perfect.
Well, and I think it's because you know what she's going through.
Exactly.
Again, like I have 2 boys, but my oldest one, Nathan, struggles with anxiety, and I struggle with anxiety. And I look at his little face when he is like melting down, anxious kid, and I'm just like, I get it, dude. But like, it's so much harder for me to parent him because I feel like I'm looking in the mirror. But I'm looking in the mirror at someone that I wish was 34 years old and could understand with my logic what I've learned and the skills that I've grown to cope with. And I get frustrated because I understand how he's feeling. I know that he's going to continue to feel that way probably the rest of his life. And like, it just is like too close to home. And I also, because like genetics and stuff, I look at him and I'm like, I made you this way. And it's so frustrating.
Yeah, exactly.
Whew, tangent.
All right.
Parenting is hard.
Yeah. But honestly, all of this, it's relevant because we're talking about, you know, risk factors and, you know, that whole how to protect my kid. And like I said, you can't necessarily control the whole Target, Walmart scare thing. Like I said, it doesn't happen as much as people think it does. At least not in our area.
I control that better than the triggers and the traumas. But maybe that's just me.
Well, and I think what we were talking about earlier is that it's hard to hear about relationship and the relationship with your kid matters because they will see it somewhere else because you have to own the fact of like, am I doing my best? And obviously no parent's perfect, so don't hear me say like if your child has problems it's all your fault. That's not true at all.
It's not.
But it helps and it goes so far. I think I said earlier, one of the biggest pieces of Rahab is mentoring. We have a minor mentoring program, like I said, with the minors in the court system. Anyone who comes into our safe house gets their own mentor. Even in our drop-in center, we mentor the women that come in from the streets and from the jails. Because we have seen over and over again, both like just through observation and even with some partners that'll do some stats on our programming, is that mentoring is kind of the make or break frequently. Girls that are in Rahab mentoring can graduate at a much higher rate and a quicker rate out of the court system, the program that they're in. And we see even beyond their time with us, like in physical locations, they stay connected with Rahab staff and their mentors, even as they're transitioning out into, new life and into that survival and like thriving spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think mentoring, like, is it more on the healing side or the prevention side or both?
It's both.
Yeah.
It's both. So, it matters for healing because they need to have a healthy relationship, not only modeled, but like given to them because they've not had that before.
It's filling that void that
it's
they
filling
would
the
go
void.
search somewhere else
So
for.
if you have a healthy relationship with a mentor, you are less likely to try to find that void, like fill that void again with an unhealthy relationship. Prevention-wise, like I said, we have youth that are considered at risk. They're not actually considered victims yet. Whether sometimes it's they haven't disclosed that. Sometimes, like I said, they don't identify, so then we can't mark them as on the paperwork. But yeah, I put in my notes before I was coming tonight. Relationship is interventions, also the prevention. So, and I even told you earlier, like if you feel like you want to get your child connected into a mentor with somebody who is healthy and believes what you believe, and that your child could look up to them and you trust them, why not get them connected with someone who's willing to be consistent?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think
that
that's
is not
so
you.
important. Like sex trafficking aside, like even if your child isn't, technically labeled as an at-risk child,
they need somebody besides you to talk to.
Yeah. So some of you may know, and some others may not, that I'm the co-founder of an app called Come, and it's an app that allows you to swap free babysitting with your trusted circle of friends. And one of the reasons we created it is not just because of the free time for the parents, but because really your kids end up building relationships with other kids that you are friends of their parents of, and it builds relationships. Like you've watched my kids, you both watched my kids actually a lot of times, and like my kids would know you and trust you, and then the idea that they're building these relationships young, so that then when they are in high school or junior high or fearfully younger, like, and they're going through something hard, maybe they're afraid to talk to mom about it, afraid to talk to dad, like they have other trusted adults in their life, someone else that they would trust, or someone else that might say, hey, he seemed a little off this time I saw him, it wasn't something that I usually see, just wanted to let you know. Like having that support system of people around you,
just I think it's so important. Set of eyes and ears.
Anyways, like the big fears aside, it's just a good tool.
And
to have other adults in their life.
The important thing about that is that non-judgment. Like in Rahab, we talk about we are no judgment ever to any of the one we were with, and that's exactly because it's about building trust, it's about building a relationship, and sometimes when our child can't talk to us, it's because they're like, well, I'm going to get in trouble for this. So then they don't want to talk to us about it. Whereas if they had someone who, was a role model for them in a healthy way, they might be more willing to be like, hey, this thing is going on at school or with my friends, and I'm thinking about this, or I'm bothered by this. And they don't have to worry about like, oh, my parents gonna like ground me or something.
And I can speak to that of, I believe that I have a very good relationship with Olivia. However, she's always so scared she's going to disappoint me. She's afraid she's going to let me down. She's afraid she's going to cause disappointment. And in her little head, she's never said this, but I'm sure it's because she's like, that's the only parent I've left. Like, I don't want to disappoint her. I don't want to, because you create that fear. And I only know that because I grew up with that. So having those outside people, just in my specific situation, are so very important. And so I don't, parents, you may be listening to this and thinking, well, I'm there to talk. They can tell me anything. And even if you create that environment that they can tell you anything, I could tell my mom anything and everything. And I knew that. I knew she posed as two people. So my mom would be friend and my mom would be mom. And so there'd be some times where I would have to go to her and be like, I need you to be my friend and not my mom. And she would listen to me and give me friend advice. And no matter what I shared with her, she wasn't allowed to mom me during that situation.
Yeah.
That helped tremendously. But I can tell you in the teenage years, there were still things I never took to friend or mom. But I had 2 neighbors that lived across the street that I could tell anything to. And I do think, to a certain extent, they saved me in a lot of situations.
That's awesome. Yeah, one thing I try to do with my kids, and they're not in high school yet, so right now it's working, but it could change, is like I work really hard. Like when I know they're upset about something, specifically my older one, because he does have anxiety, and I can tell when he wants to tell me something, and he literally will say, well, if I tell you, I'll get in trouble. And I'll just put on his face, like, you can tell me anything. And I like tell myself in my head, whatever he tells you, you gotta act cool. So far, it's never been like anything too serious. I mean,
I don't pull the cool
it's been some
card
things where I'm like in my head, I'm like, that's a terrible way to feel. Like that's actually really mean. Like I might have like that reaction in my head, but I'm just like straight face, poker face. Let him just speak and don't react, because you can't take that reaction back. But then I can like talk to him more calmly and coolly.
I do not have that card.
My
well, he's
older
only 9. So.
Mine goes from 0 to 10. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
My older son is also has anxiety, and even some of the like risk factor things, I fear that I'm like screwing my kid up. Like I am also divorced, and like that's one of the like risk factors of many, like I said. But so he goes to see a counselor.
Now I feel like I need to take this test.
And he
see
loves
how screwed
her.
up I am.
He loves his counselor, which is amazing. Like if you ever go to counseling, you have to make sure you connect with your counselor. It doesn't work otherwise. But he loves her, and I say, how'd it go? But I don't probe him about the time they have together. If he wants to share with me, he's welcome to, and I'll take it in. And sometimes there are things that she feels like she needs to share, but we have this understanding of like it's between you guys. You talk through it, you work it out. There's even something cool that I think is actually a social media thing I read, and my kids are not in high school yet either, so I'm planning on doing this. Hopefully I remember it, like, 10 years from now or whatever. But I read this blog or something once about a parent who said they had, for their high school kids and their older kids that were going out with friends and doing things outside of the house more than when they're little, they had this code word that they could just text their parents.
Yep.
And say, like, code word, no questions asked. We'll give you a call, make up a reason to come pick you up from wherever you're at, and you will never get in trouble for using this code word. We will never ask questions, but if you ever feel unsafe, if you ever feel pressured to do something you know is wrong, even if you're just sick of being in the situation you're in or with the friends you're with, like, use this code word, text us, we'll make an excuse. You can blame it on us, so we're the bad guy. And you can save face in front of your friends.
We actually have one.
And I just thought it was brilliant. Like, my kids are not at that age yet. Like, where they go, like, I know exactly who they're with, where they're at. Like, I know how long they're going to be there because they don't have a phone. They're 7 and 5. And I usually set up those play dates for them. But I was like, when they're in high school, I want them to be able to trust me enough to say, I need help and I need to get out of this. But know that, like, there's a safe space that they don't have to tell me if they don't want to, because I'm trusting them to use their judgment. And
so we actually have one. And we've only had to talk about it twice because there's only been 2 times, Olivia. I allowed Olivia to go to the football game on Friday nights, and I had some spies there, but Mom was not there. And ours is I left the pineapple on the counter. Mom, can you clean it up?
That's a really long code word.
Well, the reason for that she came up with them, but more of like another big thing is Olivia gets embarrassed very easily. Mm-hmm. So it was, I will pick you up. If you say you left it on the counter, I'll pick you up down the street a little bit and I'll have my lights on bright. So that way her friends don't see me picking her up or something like that.
I love it.
And that idea originally came from my mom. So my mom was not this cool with me, and I hope she's listening. I didn't have any of this stuff. I just wasn't allowed to do anything. But my little brother, my mom was literally and my little brother's 11 years younger than me, so she was like more of a parent. Like she had all of the charts and stuff. She would pick up my brother's friends even. They had code words. And
that goes back to the mentoring thing.
There
like,
were
she
a
was
couple
safe person
times,
in their life.
and there are a couple friends that I know for sure that actually called my mom at like 1, 2 in the morning where they had drank too much. And the rule was, I will pick you up and I will take you home. I am not hiding this. This is not okay. But if you find yourself in a situation that you can't get out of, I will get you and we will figure it out. So it was kind of like a don't go get drunk on Friday night and think you can call me every Friday night.
Right.
But, and there are several of his friends that I know for sure my mom went and picked up and like kind of mentored in. And I loved that. And I remember growing up, my brother and I were never allowed to go to people's houses, but people were always allowed in our house. And it was like this big, it wasn't the party house, but you could come and know that you were safe. And there was always endless food.
I want that to be my house. I want my house to be like the place to be.
I never understood it because unfortunately, when I was that age, my dad was an extreme alcoholic, and so we couldn't have people over. So I just didn't have friends. But with my brother, we literally had like a cabinet downstairs because if you have the cabinet of food, that's where all the teens want to be. We had a food cabinet, so that does help. And I think that that's important to have, as it makes them know that they have an out in a situation that they feel uncomfortable with, and not I'm going to get in trouble, but I need out. And what's worse, being in the situation or admitting to my parents I did something wrong. And so that's something really to focus on. I think kind of goes into that whole the relationship of it, like allowing kids are going to be kids. Kids are going to get in situations. Kids are going to allowing them to have an out and not just a you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Well, that's true, because even with girls, and when they are being trafficked, they don't have any safe spot. Like they are in constant, like heightened awareness of, something's going to happen, or that feeling of, fight or flight. So when mentoring comes into the picture, there is suddenly a safe place for them, a safe person, because frequently the girls that we mentor that are working in the court system, they are still in their traumatic environments. Now, the safe house is a different story. We can take them out of it. They can do a whole other level of healing because they are removed from, the dangerous and unsafe environment that they're in. But mentoring works even if they're not out of that environment. So in the everyday life, when we're talking about our kids, and most of us, our kids probably aren't high risk. I mean, the fact that we're talking about this and we care is like a check mark for like for our kids, in our kids' favor. But when I say like mentoring is prevention as well, that's
definitely
huge.
Yeah. So one thing I really hope we get from tonight's conversation is just having more compassion for if you meet somebody who's been through this, understanding that it's not a choice, that they're not a prostitute, but they were prostituted,
and you don't know their whole story.
Yeah, you don't know
their whole story.
I would say typically, we are of Americans, they like to make stereotypes and like to just assume. And I think that is definitely a situation that happens quite often.
Yeah, they are hurting. Like I said, 12 to 14, you're not making a decision to be a prostitute. Someone drug you or dragged you or tricked you or manipulated you into that situation. Yeah. You're not deciding I'm going to go,
half the time
tricks.
They can't even make lunch for themselves.
Yeah, half the time. So yeah, definitely like compassion and love and just awareness that you don't know their story and that you shouldn't be judging them for who they are. And I would add to that, and this is something we have a conversation with in Rahab internally. We don't currently have programming to use the everyday jargon for pimps or johns, like traffickers or customers. We don't currently have programming for them, but it's a conversation of we do need to address that at some point. And as a way of awareness, like to use our pastor's phrase, hurting people hurt people. So frequently a trafficker, that's what they've known their whole life, or they are hurt in other ways and this is how they've been taught to cope, to live, to function, and to make their money and make their living, and none of it is excusable or right. But often we're going to need to have compassion for them as well, because it's easy.
They're broken too.
They're broken too. It's easy to hear these conversations, and it's easy to get on the bandwagon of, oh, these are victims that we need to care for and take care of, and that is 100% true, and that is what we do day in and day out at Rahab. But I also want to put in that, like, traffickers are broken. The people who buy, frequently men, but I know women do too sometimes, but they are also broken. They are looking for connection. Mm-hmm. So just having that awareness as well is useful in the big picture of everything else.
For sure.
Yeah. So if people want to help in another way, like, what are ways that people can get involved? Obviously, prevention of, if you do have children or other young people, women in your life, and if you have people that you need to show compassion to, but if they want to take it a step further, like, what are things like people can do to be involved?
Yeah, specifically with Rahab.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm going to read off our little list here. We have a brand new brochure that I love just sharing with people.
And a brand new logo, which I love.
Brand new logo. Yeah, and my story is pretty cool in how I came to Rahab. I started at the advertising agency that made this logo for Rahab.
Oh, really?
Yes, It's a fun story for another time. But so the ways you can get involved, obviously having a conversation like this and building awareness and understanding and just gaining some knowledge is always useful. But as a development director, and if you don't know what that means, it means I'm the fundraiser. I joke that, like, development is a fancy nonprofit word for I'm the one who asked for the money.
I love that.
So you could always donate to Rahab. Our website is rahab-ministries.org, and we have a link on there that you could donate. But beyond that, advocate, spread the word, and spread the accurate word. So like,
and I think there's so many important.
Myths and misnomers out there about what human trafficking is and what it looks like. Letting people understand that it's real. It's happening here. It's happening to the women and girls in our neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. There are no socioeconomic or racial, like, lines when it comes to human trafficking. If you are vulnerable, you are at risk. Like, it doesn't matter if you are from Hudson. It doesn't matter if you are from the hood of Akron. Like, if you have those vulnerabilities, like,
you're a target.
You are a target. And not saying that to scare people, but saying that to bring awareness to people.
The realness of it.
People think that, like, oh, it doesn't happen because I live in a nice neighborhood. It's not about that. It's about the relationship, about those holes and that trauma that these women and girls experience and have experienced in childhood. So advocate. You can volunteer with Rahab. We have so many volunteer opportunities, and we provide training. In fact, we require that you go through our training. We do not let anyone interact with the women and girls that we work with without going through extensive training because of how sensitive that it is. And we do everything we say trauma informed, being aware of what they have gone through and being able to respond appropriately to that. Invite us to speak. So you guys invited me here tonight, which is pretty awesome. But we speak to medical groups, hospitals, doctors' offices. We speak to civic groups. We speak to law enforcement. We have great relationships with the courts and the law enforcement agencies, both local and federal, in our areas. Churches. One of the things that our CEO, Suzanne, likes to say is that the church, like, Christ's body, is the answer to human trafficking. Like, we want to call the church to action because this is something that we are called to do as believers. Be aware, like I said, and then pray. If you are a believer, pray. Pray for the women and girls in our care. Pray for the ones who've yet to receive any hope or healing. Pray for the staff. Pray for volunteers. There is so much that I could say about prayer and the things that you see God do, like being involved in Rahab. And it's amazing. And we had a staff meeting this morning that was just incredible, and it was so full of God's presence. Like, you are emotionally and spiritually drained after. but yeah, pray. So all those things, can always give us a call if you want more information. Quarterly, we do something called our Essentials training, which is like a 6-hour training on a Saturday that goes deep dive into all this stuff on who Rahab is, where we came from, what human trafficking really looks like, what happens with trauma in people, and then some real stories on what we see when people embrace that hope and healing that is offered to them.
I love that. And we're actually, we want to encourage you guys, take any of those steps that Nicole just talked about in order to be part of the change. And then also this Sunday, the 330 to go head honcho show, part of our network, Hank will be doing a show on Rahab specifically. So we did talk about Rahab tonight, but it was more about spreading awareness about human trafficking. But this Sunday at 7 specifically, they will be talking more detail about Rahab and real life story.
Mm-hmm.
And we hope that you guys will tune into that if you want to hear more.
Yeah, that'll be good. They've got some good speakers on there.
Yeah, the
Angel I adore.
The ladies that are coming to speak to that, they are dynamite, and they actually know way more than I do. Like, I feel like I'm a newbie in all this. So please, if I said anything that you're like, what is she saying? Like, please clarify if I said something that doesn't make sense, because I am learning. But this matters, and it matters that people understand the reality, and not to be scared. Like I said, we don't need to live in fear, but it matters because you can make a difference.
Just being aware, living in awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
I will not be here next week.
It's true. I am going solo.
I will be in Hawaii.
Yeah.
I will not be thinking of you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
She's not even gonna tune in and watch. Let's be real.
There's a 6-hour difference.
So it'll be like 2 in the afternoon.
No, it's the other way.
No.
Is it?
No, it'll be 2 in the afternoon.
Oh,
No,
then
2
you
in
know
the
what?
afternoon.
They're behind us.
Yeah.
Because California's 3 hours behind us.
Yeah, because the sun won't be there yet.
You're sitting on the beach.
It'll be 2 in the
I may
afternoon.
tune in, but I may not.
Anyways.
You might not want my comments after a couple hours of sitting on the beach.
I'll be going rogue after all this. With my friend Sarah Kane, who's been on here many a time, and we're going to be talking about adult friendships, friendship after life change, just how to be 34/5, how about just 30 to 50 years old, and
Whoa, you just did
I know, I went up to
Never
50.
mind on there.
I mostly wanted like people who are in their young 40s to feel included, or your old 40s, whatever. I totally just went off the rail. I'm sorry. Anyways, we hope you'll tune in. So that'll be a different conversation than this one, but still a good one. So we like to mix it up with happy, sad, and real.
please continue this conversation. Just because the show is over, our comment feeds stay on. Private message us if there's a direct question that you want and you need Nicole's contact or anybody from Rahab. Feel free to send that our way, or we can even tag Rahab on here. You can send them personal messages. So let's continue the conversation. Continue just bringing awareness of what the real is. So, all right. Thanks, guys, for tuning in tonight.
Thank you.